Okay, good evening, fellow Scalonians. Again, this is Jesmed F Suma, and today we just want to have a general discussion on the subject of corruption in general as it relates to Sierra Leone. Okay, sorry about that. There was some background re-echo of my comment. Now, we all know how corrosive and how endemic corruption has been in Sierra Leone over the years. And the corruption that we experience under the 10 years period of the despotic leadership of Ernest Bai Koroma has been the worst in the history of Sierra Leone. We've experienced corruptions in the 60s during the first government of the SLPP party. We know they were corrupt, and Seka Stephen took over from there and accelerated corruption and make it institutionalized practice and became a culture of the people of Sierra Leone, that everybody will be engaged in corruption. They make you a teacher, a principal, a permanent secretary, and Seka Stephen once said, "Usa the entire cow, na they eat." So that became a culture, it became a de facto for somebody expectation that everybody will have of a minister or a permanent secretary when they are given a position of trust, and they will always find a way to enrich themselves. But the way Ernest Koroma handled the system of governance and the way he practiced corruption within the last 10 years is completely different from that of Seka Stephen. And I will show you the difference. In Seka Stephen days, you have to be a very close ally and insider of the Seka Stephen circle before you can engage in an act of corruption and get away with it. So in Seka Stephen days, the number of sacred cows were very limited to very few people in a circle. In Ernest Koroma's days, he institutionalized corruption to an extent that every department of government and every branch of government were already incorporated into this practice of corruption, such that nobody will check them, nobody will be worried about whether you will be prosecuted or not, be you a judge, a magistrate, or a lawyer, or be you a policeman, or let me say a medical doctor, professional malpractices. The days that we used to have the law commissions to check in on the activities of lawyers were gone under Ernest Koroma's days, period, and a whole lot of different issues. But most importantly, for us to have a clear picture, a picture of the magnitude of corruption based on the volume of money this government and Ernest Koroma dealt with over the last 10 years, I want us to look at our gross domestic product between 2007 and 2018. Now, the gross domestic product, which is the GDP, called GDP, is the monetary value of all the goods and services that are produced in a given year. And governments generate revenue from the economic activities of businesses and individuals, which is generated from the volume from the GDP itself. So when you talk about where government gets money from, under the government of Ernest Bai Koroma, there are three different categories of areas they get money from. You have the taxation, money generated from taxes levied on businesses and individuals, which was within the range of 15 to 20%. So let's take 15% as an average between 2007 and 2018. 15% collected as taxation. And that includes custom duties and all other different fees that people pay for services rendered by government. And taxes paid by individual businesses that are operating like the mining companies and so on and so forth. Now, those taxation, the money is collected from the output of goods and services. The second source of revenue for the government are the loans that the government signed up to, took on behalf of the people of Sierra Leone, which generations yet unborn will continue to pay. The third area are the grants and donations that are given to the government on behalf of, to support certain programs that the government is undertaking. Now, if you look at the GDP before 2007 was within the average of $3 billion, $2.8 to $3 billion. But because of the boom in the iron ore production, which according to the government transition report added another $1.6 billion to our gross domestic product, between 2007 and 2018, the output was ranging between the range of $3.8 billion to $4.2 billion. Now let us take the average of $4 billion between 2007 and 2018, the 10-year period, 2007 to the 10-year period. So we are getting an average of $4 billion. If you take 15% of $4 billion as the tax that government collected or ought to have collected, we're talking about $600 million. So on average, the Ernest Koroma government was generating from our GDP in the form of taxation an average of $600 million every year. Now multiply $600 million by 10 is a lot of money. It's about $6 billion. Now, you add to that figure the $2.6 billion loan that they took on behalf of the people of Sierra Leone. That adds up to $8 billion. If you consider the amount of grant and what you call budgetary subsidies received from donor agencies and foreign governments, you're talking about another average of $150 to $200 million a year. So, on average, you will say the Ernest Koroma government played with an average of $10 billion within the past 10 years in terms of actual revenue that was collected by the government or ought to have collected by the government. And the reason why I said ought to have collected, because under the Ernest Koroma government, it is not all the time that taxes are collected from businesses that ought to have paid to pay taxes. There are certain businesses that are exempted by default from paying taxes because those businesses have connections with special individuals within his government who are always giving out cash out. Those businesses are used like as a cash cow. So when they are broke or they are never broke, they always have money. When they need extra money to lavish around, they will go to those businesses. They will give them $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $50,000. So some of those businesses, like some mining companies, like some import-export businesses in Sierra Leone, were by default exempted from paying taxes, not in the formal sense of the word, but just in practice because nobody chased them from paying taxes. So it is possible that the entire $10 billion that I'm referring to in this case may not have been directly paid to the government, part of which was paid to the cronies of Ernest Koroma. Under his government, there are 3 different categories of sacred cows. You had sacred cows, and if need be, we can name specific individuals that fall under some of these categories. There are those who everybody will know that based on their lifestyle and some of the things that they did, they were actually engaged in an act of corruption. And in some cases, you will actually see evidences of their involvement in an act of corruption. But because they fall within the sacred cow, they are neither prosecuted nor questioned. They go about doing what they do, and nobody will question them. So one will ask, what was the relevance of the anti-corruption agency? Well, realistically, the anti-corruption agency was set up not to fight corruption. It was set up as a gatekeeper for Ernest Koroma and his cronies, a way to protect them from being prosecuted from engaging in an act of corruption, and for prosecuting those who will fall out with Ernest Koroma. Because if you live in Sierra Leone within a couple of years and you deal with their government, whether you like it or not, if you want to survive, you have to engage in some act of corruption. So the anti-corruption agency was used to keep tab of those who may fall out of favor of Ernest Koroma's favor. All the sacred cows who are never prosecuted, you have the, what I call the holy goats. Not ghost, goats. The holy goats are those who engage in an act of corruption, and when their activity becomes so obvious to the eyes of the public, and it becomes so stinking and becomes an embarrassment for the president or his party, that individual is moved from that position. And we saw what happened to what is called Logus when he was in the vice president's office, when he was engaged in some outrageous act of corruption. Instead of him being prosecuted, he was removed from the vice president's office. And we have several examples of that happening under Ernest Koroma's government. And within a few months, you will see that very individual being assigned to a different position, most likely higher than where the person was initially occupying. So they fall under the category of holy goats. Then you have the third category of blessed chicken. These are the ones that are actually indicted. In some cases, prosecuted to an extent that they are not found guilty. In very few cases, they are found guilty, but because they fall within the category of blessed chickens, they are just given a fine which is far less than the value of what they are accused of being involving embezzling from the government. So in some cases, they are removed out of office, like the former Minister of Health, who stole some money. He was found guilty. He was fined a very small amount of money, which was like a tap in the back telling him, thank you for, being bold enough to steal, but you're not within the president's circle, so we'll just let you go and you pay no fine. And part of that has to do with loopholes within the Anti-Corruption Act itself. You have to remember that some of the people that were involved in framing the Anti-Corruption Act were criminals themselves that had a premeditated plan to engage in an act of corruption. So they set it up such that it will only serve as not as a hindrance to their activities, but also as a tool for them to use against those who they want to use it to. And if you want to use that particular act against them, they shield and protecting themselves. I will give you several examples. What they did was they shifted the power from the prosecutors into the hands of the judges. They made sure that the judges had so much discretion within the current Anti-Corruption Act that the current, the actual corruption will now be shifted from out in the offices into the chambers of the judges. This is how it happens. You have certain clauses within the Anti-Corruption Act that will say when somebody is found guilty, you are fined a minimum of 300,000 leones, Remember, 300,000 leons is an insult. 300, minimum of 300,000 leons and or a jail term. So that gives the discretion to the judge to either fine you 300,000 leons and above and or impose some additional punitive action such as imprisonment. It's like the act of corruption was being treated as, what do you call it, not necessarily a criminal offense, like, you know, one that you're not held responsible as a criminal per se. That is the way the corruption was being enforced in Sierra Leone under Ernest Bai Koroma. So the reason why we're having this discussion is for the new government to realize that if they want to fight corruption, we cannot rely on the current Anti-Corruption Act. There are certain areas that needs to be amended. We need to call the attention of the parliamentarians to tighten up those loopholes that were created by the cronies of Ernest Bai Koroma, because they knew they were going to be found guilty of breaching this very act that they were putting together. So they made sure that the judges had the discretional power to either impose punitive action or not. So even if somebody is found guilty of embezzling, say, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $500,000, which is the average amount of monies that these guys were playing with, all you have to do is to make sure you give a share of that money to the judge. Because by the law, he has the power to determine whether you go to jail or not. That is why 99.9% of those prosecuted and found guilty under Ernest Bai Koroma never darkened the shadows of a prison in Sierra Leone. Now, if you treat corruption as a civil offense, then you're not prepared to fight corruption yet. Corruption should be treated as a criminal offense. And as a criminal offense, the punitive measures must be commensurable to the magnitude of the crime. What do I mean by that? There are certain changes that I have recommended. There was a time I reviewed the current Anti-Corruption Act and made certain recommendations, sent copies to Ernest Koroma's government in 2012, 2013, and then also sent a copy to the previous anti-corruption czar, which is JFK, and also sent a copy to the outgone anti-corruption czar, Ade Macaulay. And in that review, I made recommendations that if somebody is found guilty of embezzling a certain amount of money or engage, well, fraud, embezzlement are just one aspect of corruption. There are different phases to corruption. But in this case, we're just focusing on fraud and embezzlement of government resources, and in some cases, abuse of government resources. I'm going to touch on the other areas of fraud, waste, and abuse of government resources that made us to be in this current state of decadence. But let me focus on this issue of review and amendment to the current Anti-Corruption Act. So now, we should take the discretion from the judges and make certain aspects of committing the crime of corruption go with mandatory imprisonment. If somebody is found guilty of embezzling $100,000, my recommendation, which I sent to them, was that the person should be required to pay a fine twice the value. So instead of saying 300 million or 30 million fine minimum, say a pecuniary value to the amount of twice the pecuniary value of the amount of the amount for which the person is found guilty. So if you are found guilty of embezzling $100,000, in my recommendation, the person should pay a fine of $200,000 and refund the full value of the amount of money that the person embezzled. So in this case, you will be required to pay $300,000. $100,000 restitution for what you have stolen, and $200,000 punitive measure for stealing that. And a minimum imprisonment of 6 months. Minimum 6 months. I'm being nice, that's why I said 6 months. Because right now they don't go to jail. So 6 months is just a start off. Now, if the person fails to pay or refund the amount of money that they have stolen, they found them guilty, then the person will be required to go for an additional 6 months imprisonment. So it will be 1 year imprisonment if you don't pay. And if you don't pay the fine and you don't pay the money back for which you are found guilty, then the government should have the power to, one, go into every asset in your name or you are associated with, including businesses that you are associated with, and all of that will be impounded to pay the government for the money, for the amount, for what you are found guilty in court with. Now, in addition to that, the person should be banned from doing business with government, partaking in any political activity for at least 10 years. When you have deterrent punitive measures like what I have just stated, you just need 1 or 2 examples. It will be easy to create a situation wherein people will begin to check themselves in terms of the way they deal with others. Now, I will delve into some of the other recommendations that I think needs to be put in place in the form of trying to amend the current Anti-Corruption Act, or actually come up with a completely brand new act, because that Anti-Corruption Act was created by APC and was created to perpetuate the act of corruption and protect themselves. That Anti-Corruption Act is not strong enough to prosecute them. Now, there are different forms by which Anes Kroma and his cronies, I call them Anes Kroma and Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Anes Kroma, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. He had about 40 cronies around him who were responsible for this economic treason. I call it economic treason, and that is the way the government should look at it. That is the way the current anti-corruption czar should look at it. It is an economic treason to the people of Sierra Leone. Right now, according to the government transition report, we are required to pay about $262 million every year to service the loans that Anes Kroma and his cronies took on the back of the people of Sierra Leone. Now, you tell me if that is not an economic treason. Each one of them should go to jail for no less than 5 to 10 years. Now, there are other forms through which these guys were practicing corruption. For instance, under the support of China, which is a pattern that we have seen with Chinese government in different parts of Africa, whilst we are reviewing their activities and their engagement, what China does and what they did with the APC government in 2012 and 2018 is that they create an affiliation not only with a particular despotic, corrupt government like Anes Kroma, they also create an affiliation with the party. Because of the days of one-party system are gone, they know that there is a multi-party system. So what they do, they create an affiliation with the ruling party, as they did with APC. So they kind of try to offer grants and contracts and loans to the government on behalf of the nation as a way of giving the party and the government money for them to launder, to prepare to get themselves re-elected. They did that in Zimbabwe, they did that in Zambia, they did that in Angola. But Zambia, lately, the last election, they lost. The Chinese government lost, and Sierra Leone, they've lost also. So this is an example to show to them that we are beginning to see their pattern of operation in Africa in trying to reap the blood of our people. So what they did in 2012, they bankrolled the election of Anes Kroma to re-elect him. They did the same thing in 2018. But why it was a little tough in 2018 is because we stood firm to campaign against the the Mamama contract, the new airport contract. The Chinese government wanted to use that as a conduit through which they will channel money to the APC party for them to pump money into the election, as they did, but they would have done 3 times that if we had not mounted a campaign against them in putting the people of Sierra Leone in such additional debt of $300 million, $360 million or so. So what will happen, what used to happen and what would have happened was that if we had allowed them to go into that agreement, they would have taken that money and used that money on election. The Chinese government will know about it, but because they want to re-elect the corrupt party, they don't know what is going to happen with the rest of the other parties in case they come to power. They will continue pumping money and meddle into our politics. And that needs to look into, and we're beginning to see how they are now cozying around the current government, and that is how they tend to corrupt governments in Africa across the board. So you will notice that each time a contract is issued, contracts are only issued to cronies of the party and people that have affiliation with Ernest Bai Koroma. And when I talk about fraud, well, I'm not talking about like 100,000, 200,000. They are talking about millions of dollars. Within the past 10 years, the Ernest Bai Koroma has allegedly spent over $760 million on the energy sector. Now you tell me, after spending over $760 million in the energy sector, and yet today we are still struggling for electricity in Sierra Leone. Now you tell me, what is the development Ernest Koroma brought to Sierra Leone? When you consider the fact that the day they stepped out, within days, we don't have electricity. If you have energy infrastructure solidly built within the country and not an offshore ship that can move any minute away, we will not have the issue of blackout. That would have been a legacy of Ernest Koroma to say, at least I brought energy to Sierra Leone. But today, he cannot claim to have brought energy to Sierra Leone when you consider the fact that few days after they left power, we don't have electricity in the country because they had, outsourced the infrastructure of energy sector. $760 million, they need to tell us where they took that money to. 25 million was squandered by Hafsa to Kaba. And so many millions was spent on so-called Mumbuna. And millions of dollars were so-called spent around the country. And up to today, Freetown, the capital city of Sierra Leone, cannot boast of 24-hour electricity. Now let's talk about the roads. And Ernest Koroma claims that he has had built infrastructure. I've built road here, I've built road here. Now let's look at the economics of the roads. In most other countries, for a road like Wilkinson Road, which is about 4.5 kilometers or 4.5 miles, it will cost no more than $4.5 million. And Ernest Koroma's record shows that they spent $19 million. Where did they take the remaining $5 or more million into their private coffers? Now, whenever they siphon such huge millions of dollars out of government coffers, now, who suffers? The teachers, who are fighting hard to impact knowledge into the brains of our youths. The nurses and the doctors, who are fighting hard to make sure that they can keep our people healthy. Our market women, who have to deal with the rough roads and the rough lack of markets and so on and so forth. Because once you siphon such huge amounts of money out of the government coffers, every time they go about crying that the government does not have money. The other area they used to embezzle money is this so-called per diem. Now, before I even come to the per diem, let me touch about how Ernest Koroma expanded the size of government, bloated it 3 or 4 times the original size. They created fake agencies. What Ernest Koroma did, he made sure that he made the Sierra Leone government as an employment agency for members of his parties and his cronies. You go to the embassies, you will have education attaches planting people in those offices who do not know a bee from a bull's foot. How can you have somebody as an education attaché who does not even know what education is? You have press attachés in all of these embassies. These are all people associated with him because he wanted to make himself demigod. He wants people to worship him. So all the so-called fanfare that you see, oh, people, we like an Eskroma, less Eskroma, is because they were milking from the network of corruption that he had created, wherein judges pay themselves, police pay themselves, lawyers pay themselves. They created commissions here, commission there, planting people that sit down in offices doing nothing, and yet they take thousands of dollars. And in fact, thousands of dollars, I'm telling you, there were people in Sierra Leone that are government employees that an Eskroma was paying in dollars. I repeat, they were paying them in dollars. As if it was now, he created a conspiracy to just drain money out of the government of the people of Sierra Leone. Now you tell me if that is not an economic treason. So all I'm asking is that if we really want to put an end to corruption, this is the time. This is the time to put support under any effort that goes after those who have been robbing the nation of its opportunities of growth. This is the time. I know some of you have an issue. I know some people have said, oh, well, how about Marabio? They accuse him of stealing $18 million. Now, whoever says that, you must be a fool. Do you know why I say that? Because it is not Marabio to go police himself. You mean Marabio will come and say, oh, an Eskroma, I stole $18 million. Put me in jail? It was an Eskroma who failed to do it. And so if Marabio stole $18 million then and he become a change man, he wants to fight corruption, we need to support the effort. We need to go after these guys. Because once you set an example, that will send a shockwave across even the current government to know that we have set up a high standard. If we fall short of that high standard, the people will be jubilating to see us hunted back. And they will not want that to happen. I know some of us have had our doubt, like me, I had my doubt. And I've been drum beating that these guys take this step. And I was giving them 6 months that if they don't pursue this act of chasing these guys to bring back the monies that they stole from the people of Sierra Leone, so that we'll go build schools and hospitals in Potloko district for those who come from Potloko district, Bombali district for those who come from Bombali district and other parts of the country. Get the money from them in their offshore accounts. They have accounts in China. They have accounts in Dubai. They have accounts in other parts of Asia. Because they know that if they have huge monies in bank accounts in America, we know how to get it out from them. You don't know that if they have a bank account in some parts in Europe, like, I don't mean East European Europe, but Western Europe, like England, Germany, and those places, we'll have a way to chase them. So they have their accounts in Eastern Europe, China, and some parts of Africa. We need to find a way to either lock them up a minimum of 10 years until they bring back those monies and we'll let them go and use that money to build hospitals, schools, and save, especially the free education. The free education, you think that's small money? That's millions of dollars. Millions of dollars we need to be spending to make that a reality. Under the World Bank assessment some years back, when I read in 2012, no, 2010, the Sierra Leone government was supposed to spend, was required to spend a minimum of, you know, $12 million a year on education for them to meet the millennium goal. And these guys were spending something less than $450,000. You know, so there is a lot that needs to be done. So I've addressed the issue about those who are claiming that, oh, if Marabio was corrupt, so he does not have the moral foundation to fight corruption. Everybody can change. I'm not saying he's changed. I don't know that. But for now, based on the example I'm seeing, I think we need to render him support. And if he was not prosecuted for the 18 million, Don't blame him. Blame Anes Nkrumah, because Anes Nkrumah thought he was going to get some exemption from being persecuted. We don't know that yet either. Perhaps he's going to be exempted. But so, we don't know whether they are playing with our psychic, but I don't think Madabio will be dumb enough to play with the psychic of the people of Sierra Leone to pretend to fight corruption and then let Anes Nkrumah exempted. He needs to go to jail. Anes Nkrumah needs to go to jail. He locked people like us up just by saying the truth about his government. And now he needs to go to jail for frauding the people of Sierra Leone. And failure of which will be a treason by this current government if they fail to put Anes Nkrumah to jail, because he has committed economic treason. The next thing the government needs to do is to resize and reduce the size of government. Consolidate some of those commissions and agencies Anes Nkrumah created so that we reduce the level of expenditure. Because there is no way you can grow an economy if you keep wasting the revenue that you generate and you do not put that revenue into productive sectors of the economy. You waste them on per diems. They are paying themselves $400, $450 a day per diem. Can you imagine, poor as we are in Sierra Leone? Teachers don't earn that amount of money. Doctors don't earn $450 a month. And yet these guys had the audacity to pay themselves $450 a day when they travel on per diem. And some people, they go to one conference, they bring their girlfriends, they bring their jelibas, they call them press attaches, they bring their praise singers, they call them whatever attaches, and they go with a bunch of 4 or 5 people. Each one of them are paid per diem out of the taxpayers' money. And when they are broke for money, they say, oh, them mami them, logo levy tax, GST tax. You buy tomatoes, you go for pay 15%. You buy sugar, you go for pay 15%. When they collect that money, they go put and then go spend it on themselves. Go and spend 50 fata all over the place. That's economic treason. People are not suffering in that country there. We need to go after them, and no stone should be left unturned. But the first thing that I think we need to do is to make sure we review the entire Anti-Corruption Act. That Anti-Corruption Act gives too much discretional powers to the judges. Those judges, we cannot trust them. There are some of them that are appointed by Anes Nkrumah. They still align with him. Just like some things that happened within the previously appointed folks. In any case, there are certain changes that we will have to recommend. But in any case, I want to leave the floor open in case you guys have any questions that you may want to ask for me to answer them.
I get a lot of questions actually.
Well, somebody's asking if my political ambition is still alive. Well, realistically speaking, I'm not a politician. I got involved in politics just because of the abysmal failures of leadership that I saw in the country. And I know I could be far better a leader than any of those who contested for the leadership of Sierra Leone, with the exception of Dr. Kande Yumkela. So the only person that I saw was better than me was Dr. Kande Yumkela. That is why, since my involvement in politics was not about me, was about the country, so I supported the person I know has the capability of solving the problem. But so far, so good. Madabio is pleasantly surprising us. Let's see how it goes with his own leadership. And I hope he continues on this footing, especially in this area of fighting corruption, because that is the biggest cancer. Once we can address the issue of corruption, all other aspects of running the affairs of government will fall in place, because it just needs the right type of technocrat with the right knowledge and right commitment to run the different branches and the affairs of government.
So in the same vein of corruption, I would like to talk a little bit about the hiring and firing of the Speaker of the House.
The hiring and firing of the Speaker? The Speaker was not fired.
What's his name? You know, they hire somebody first. Abbas Bundu. As the Speaker of the House. And then they later hire the lady.
No, that is not the Speaker. That's the Attorney General. Yes, that is Charles Magai.
Yeah.
Well, he's asking, what do I think about the fact that Charles Magai was fired and then now a new Attorney General is hired? Well, I was disappointed with the firing of Charles Magai for two reasons. One, because I know he has a wealth of experience, not only in the Sierra Leone politics, but in the field of law. And secondly, because I did not know of anybody better than him. But now that they've hired somebody that seems to have a very good credential, maybe one could say, yes, she's a good choice. But there are two things. There is the important aspect of knowledge that people tend to overlook. It is not the level of academic accolade that you have or the length of experience you have that matter in most cases, especially in the area of the enforcement of law and order, but it's the moral integrity of the person. I don't care how many degrees you have, I don't care how many experience you have. If you lack the moral integrity, you will not be a good Attorney General. So we are hoping that the one that was chosen to replace Charles Magai has the moral integrity. I can see that she's relatively a young lady, and I'm hoping that she will focus on her legacy, not only for herself, but for her kids and generations yet unborn behind her. If she wants her kids to be proud of her service within the next 5 years, let her do the right thing. Let her don't allow politics to cloud her judgment. If she is sure of herself, let her do what is right by the people of Sierra Leone, and she will get the support that she needs. Any more questions?
I also want to make you talk about Victor Foe. There was a time when they got something. I think we might have been just come in power. I mean, they put a fast one, like he's part of Madabio now. Well, look at that kind of backfire on him because according to the news, he's been arrested.
I hope they're hearing you.
No,
okay. What he's asking, he says he's asking about Victor Foe. There was a time when Victor Foe was trying to be proactive because knowing that there is a new government in power, he wanted to be Mr. Nice Man, going out there, supporting them, going out in social media, oh, I'm with the new government, and so on and so forth. But everybody knows Victor Foe. As early back as in the 70s, he has been the symbol of corruption in Sierra Leone. We know how stinky her hands are and how dirty they are when it comes to corruption. In fact, he's the czar in terms of knowing how to swindle funds from the government of Sierra Leone. He has been in it as early back as in the 70s to now. So everybody knows he's the symbol of corruption in Sierra Leone. So he's asking, what do I think about this so-called Connie Rabbit style that he was trying to play by coming up front to pretend like he's a Mr. Goodman? Whether that will backfire on him. Well, if what we are seeing on social media is true, it means it may have backfired on him, because I've seen some postings of an indictment of Victor Foe and some of those who were involved in the corruption relating to the Hajj Gate. And Hajj Gate is peanut for Victor Foe. Victor Foe have stolen millions and millions of dollars. There are so many areas you can catch Victor Foe of. If they want us to find out, we can give you guys information to lock him up easily. But the Hajj Gate is the obvious one that happened very recently. So I think that has backfired on him. Any more questions?
There's a recent video about one of the ministers saying that you can, spend 99% on the people and 1%, but if you keep them.
Oh, that video about the about the the chief minister. They said the chief minister made a comment that said, if they give you money to do certain tasks for and on behalf of government, please make sure at least the 99% of the money is put into what the money was given you for. And even if you steal the 1%, you know, one could close their eyes to that and say, okay. I know some people have, you know, cried him down and saying that, oh, well, he's sending a signal to encourage corruption and so on and so forth. Look, my friend, whether you like it or not, if you bring Pope John Paul from the grave, you bring it to Sierra Leone, you say Pope John Paul can't run this agency, here is $1 billion. Believe you me, whether Pope John Paul wants it or not, at least 1% of that $1 billion will be swindled, will not be taken out of the system. But if 99% of it is gone and put into, you know, the purpose for which the money was spent, believe you me, you will see result. I don't think he was condoning corruption by that comment. He was just facing reality. And nor do I think that anybody should embezzle 1% of 100% just because you've done a good job. If you want to maintain a good integrity and reputation, try your best to do 100%. But what he's saying is that if at least you have implemented 99%, I think there will not be too much need for them to prosecute you for that 1%. But unlike Anes Kroma and his cronies, they will embezzle 98% and implement 2% if they're lucky. There are some of them, they embezzle until 100% because they give contract to people that don't know a bee from a bull's foot. He give contract a construction to construct road contract to somebody who does not have a wheelbarrow. Now, I was going to talk about the road constructions. Now, let's look at the infrastructure that APC has been trumping their chest on. Oh, road construction, construction this, construction that, infrastructure. Yes, infrastructure. They created roads in certain areas that never had roads. We commend them for that, and I think we should clap for them. But guess what? At what cost? Road that should cost 14 million or 4.5 million. They swindle 19 million out of that. Road that have not even been built by the Chinese. They already put a toll, and it's going to cost us hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. Now, is that something to clap for? Is that infrastructure? Now, let's forget about that aspect. Let's look at the condition of the road. They build substandard roads, overpriced, and that's become death trap for our people. Every day, people die on those roads for road accident. According to World Bank assessment, an average of 2,055 people die on road accidents every year in Sierra Leone. Now, will you rather save 2,000 lives than have 2,000 die every year just because they put substandard roads that is full of death traps because the roads are curvy? You drive 2 lanes, 1 lane going forward, 1 lane going the other direction, and then if you happen to come across a vehicle or a truck crawling in front of you, the only way you can pass that person is by taking a risk and going to the next lane and go past the vehicle. And if you do that in a series of curves that you come across those highways going to the provinces, it is obvious that you are playing Russian roulette with your life. That is why when I go to Sierra Leone, I don't drive at night. I don't go out to the provinces at night. Even if I happen to get late in the bush, I will sleep there. But those roads are death traps. So those infrastructure that Anes Kroma is drum beating that he's doing over infrastructure, after embezzling all the monies and putting them in their pocket. That is not development for us. If you want to see development, go to Rwanda. They don't have 90% of the mineral resources that we have in Sierra Leone. They don't have it. And yet, Rwanda is the fastest growing economy in Africa today. Rwanda is the most stable economy in Africa today. And yet, Rwanda went through the same 10-year war. And in fact, theirs was even worse than ours. They destroyed almost every infrastructure in the country. But because of one thing, which is good leadership, they were able to regain back and are now growing. And Nkrumah had the biggest opportunity than any government, any leader in the history of Sierra Leone, from Samilti Magai to Tijan Kaba. And Nkrumah had the biggest opportunity within the 10 years. But unfortunately, because he's an Eyampi, a thief, and Alibaba and his 40 thieves, he squandered the opportunity to enrich himself because of greed. We need to go after them. We need to go out of them. You cannot relent on this. Don't whet our appetite and pretend to fool us, Marabio. We need to save this nation from this economic decadence that these people left us in. We need to go after them. Any more questions?
Somebody was asking about the sale of Sierra Leone.
Oh, the sale of Sierra Leone. Yes, we did. The issue of the sale of Sierra Leone is included in the transition report. And that sale is said to have generated an average of $100 million. Lahu Akibaru. $100 million. Me people, almost money now one day. $100 million. Now, and Nkrumah, in so-called Sise, Bono Sise, swindle from the people of Salone. The Sierra Leone government owned shares in Sierra Leone, part of which was through the good leadership of late Dr. Alhaji Tijan Kaba, just so that they want to rehabilitate and bring back companies into the country. He was able to make that happen and also able to make Sierra Leone have shares in the company itself so that we don't just rely on taxation. What Nkrumah did during the time the Sierra Leone was actually making profits to bring money for the people of Sierra Leone, they sold those shares below market price to themselves. He sold it to himself and Bono Sise. And then they created an act, a kind of concession to Sierra Leone, for Sierra Leone not to pay taxes. Ebo, they are making profit, but they should not pay taxes. For 10 years, Sierra Leone did not pay taxes. And yet they siphon all of those monies into their own private coffers. This guy is wicked. This guy is a murderer. Aye! People are suffering. Nurses are dying. Kids don't have school to go to. Doctors don't have medicines. They don't have equipment. Villages don't have roads to go to them. Bridges are breaking, falling apart. And this guy has the audacity to amass so much wealth for themselves. These guys are wicked, man. Anybody who comes out to support these guys and Nkrumah and his cronies, that person is a traitor to the nation. I swear to God. Any more questions?
Not really. But I'll make you just talk about a little bit about, I know some of the officials they already left the country. So what do you think we'll do for recover some of the, misallocations from the previous government?
He said some of the APC folks them don't left the country. So how this government will be able to recover some of the money they wouldn't on thief? Well, there are several options. One, you could find a way to get the European Union, if they are in any part in Europe, to agree to extradite them to Sierra Leone. If they're in America, that's easy. We can work that out. With the support of the Sierra Leone government, they just need to send us a letter. We can get them kicked out of here into Sierra Leone in handcuffs. If they go to China, well, unfortunately, the Chinese government is their godfathers. The China is their godfather, so they might not be able, they will not agree to extradite them. But there is a way to force the Chinese government to bring them. But also, it has to be based on whether there is a treaty between the government of Sierra Leone and the other government from which they have to be extradited. So what we can do is, one, make sure that the government impound every asset, every property that is in their name. Two, we must pass an act of parliament that will ban them from doing business with any government of Sierra Leone in the future for the next 20 years. And if they have affiliation with any business, be it a company or whatever, that company should be banned from doing business with government. And thirdly, they should be tried in absentia. And if they are found guilty, that particular sentence should be left hanging for the day they will step their foot in Sierra Leone. And of course, there is a way you can find out where their bank accounts are in different parts of the world except China. But even in Africa, we can find out where their bank accounts are and find a way to siphon those monies using some diplomatic leverage. There are ways to do it. But these guys, we must go after them. It is, and for those who are thinking that, oh, this is political witch hunt, it is not. It is not political witch hunt. All they are trying to do is to enforce the laws of Sierra Leone. So, if they don't enforce it, you say, oh, they know they fight corruption. Now, when they enforce it, you say political witch hunt. It's no damn political witch hunt. Nobody asked Ernest Kroma and his cronies to go steal money, to fool our people, to embezzle money. That's why the process, I hope the process is going to be open, free and fair. They're going to have judges. In fact, I will recommend let the government apply to the Commonwealth. Let the Commonwealth send judges, not from Nigeria. Oh. Nigeria, those people, that's what they did to Yahya Jammeh. They sent judges to Yahya Jammeh and they were covering for Yahya Jammeh. We don't want Nigerian judges. We don't want Ghanaian judges. We don't want judges from Africa, period. We need judges from places that know that if they do it wrongly in Sierra Leone, they can be prosecuted in their own country. So we need judges from England and other places. Those judges, not because they are honest than our Sierra Leonean, Nigerian or Ghanaian judges. No. Those judges from England and other parts of Commonwealth where they have law enforcement, they are not necessarily honest or has better integrity than our judges. No. But because they are also subjected to other laws outside Sierra Leone for which they might be held responsible if they do it wrong in Sierra Leone, is what will force them to do the commission, in fact, the judgment on these corruption cases free and fairly. Now, let me also speak to this issue about setting up commission of inquiry. I think commission of inquiry is a waste of time and waste of resources. I think we should hire more investigators, more lawyers within the anti-corruption office and give them all the tools and the power they need to prosecute, indict, and prosecute each and every one of those guys that are found wanting. Bill Gates sent millions of dollars to Sierra Leone. They had to pull out because they were siphoning the money, stealing it, and not taking care of the people. The education, Minister of Education. You had Minkailu there. Was it Minkailu Ba? Because of his special relationship with Ernest Koroma, he was one of the sacred cows. Millions of dollars were squandered. And our people were left, the kids were left without access to facilities for them to learn for a better future. So those people should be prosecuted. There should not be no waste of time for commission of inquiry. I really don't like this commission of inquiry idea. They should not set commission of inquiry. They should just go and investigate and prosecute them. Commission of inquiry is a waste of time and a waste of money. Let them bring judges from the Commonwealth to come, and because we don't know, you know, considering what happened recently with Attorney General, we don't know who else might be in Ernest Koroma's pocket, because that guy is good at tempting people. It's only people like us that we're not able to tempt. They offer to bribe, we refuse. They put us in jail, we refuse. So that's why people like us, they realize that we cannot be bribed. But there are some people who may not have that kind of you know, integrity to stand up those temptations. Any more questions? I guess the next time we're going to look at how to fight corruption in Sierra Leone. That's going to be the topic.
Do you think Ernest Koroma will be arrested?
He's asking whether I think Ernest Koroma will be arrested. Honestly, I don't know. It is my wish that he should have been arrested like a month ago. But the fact that he was allowed to travel out of the country even before the announcement of the government transition report sends a red flag that probably he might be considered a sacred cow. But that would be a mistake that Mada Bio don't consider him a sacred cow. He was the king of the mafia. He was the don of the mafia enterprise that was running Sierra Leone. He was the don. I mean, these guys were operating like a mafia. They have the consigliere, that are the lawyers that are ready to protect. They infested not only the judiciary, they actually infected even the bar association. They have cronies and bootlickers, you know, opportunists. They lump them into the bar association to protect Ernest Koroma. And those guys were seeing things going wrong. They see that Ernest Koroma was desecrating our sacred laws, raping our constitution. And they were keeping mouth shut as if they've never been to law school. What time is it?
7:01. So you want to talk a little bit about the current government, if they're going to hold themselves to the same standard within the type of hold the past regime?
Well, he's asking whether I trust the current government to hold themselves at the same high standard that they are now holding the members of the past government. Well, it is too soon to tell. But it is also clear that you have a couple of people within the current government that has shady background, that have been involved in some form of corruption, acts of corruption in the past. There are not many of them, just a few. And 2 or 3 of them are in the top positions within the government. But as I say, people can change. And I strongly believe the best thing Marabio did, I think we should not underestimate this guy. This idea of creating a chief minister and making sure that you bring in somebody who has never been involved in the politics of Sierra Leone, where very few people can claim they know him, that he will not have to look at faces, and before you see the president, you have to go through him. That was the most brilliant idea that he did in bringing that chief minister. It was such a smart, brilliant. I don't know, I'm so impressed with that idea. So much so that he can now outsource some of his actions through the chief ministers without having to have any remorse for doing it. And I think it's because of that he was bold enough to be able to fire Charles Magai without looking back. Perhaps for a good reason. We don't know what the actual reason is yet, but perhaps for a good reason. And I strongly believe with the help of the chief minister, Madabio will have the gut to fire any of his top men who will fall victim of the very standard he's trying to establish now. So I don't know whether he's going to be able to do that, but I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt and see how he goes along with this, especially with the new step that he has taken. And I know somebody had questioned the issue about how the outgone commission was fired out of office. That is a very critical issue that requires a lot of discussion. It's an issue I've looked into. From the face of it, one will say it is unconstitutional. It is illegal. It is unacceptable and should not be condoned. For the simple reason that if you can do that to get the current anti-corruption commissioner in office, then what stops you from firing the very anti-corruption? That means the very current anti-corruption commissioner will not be protected, because the very law that's supposed to protect him once he gets there is what has been violated to get him in power. But, and this is the but is centered on two areas. One, I looked at the Anti-Corruption Act itself. There are few changes between what was enacted in Parliament to what was published and gazetted. What APC did, after passing the Anti-Corruption Act, there are one or two areas, especially in section Article 4, wherein they said the commissioner can only be fired or can only be sacked. They changed that word to may. And an act of parliament, any alteration made to it must be subject to ratification by the same body. So which means if APC altered the Anti-Corruption Act before publishing it after passing it in Parliament, it means whatever they publish is not binding, should have gone through ratification through the same House of Parliament. So technically speaking, one can argue that we do not actually have an Anti-Corruption Act, because if you want to look at the technicality through which this current Anti-Corruption Act was published, then one can argue that it is not binding. So that is why that even makes the case for us to argue that we should go and review the entire Anti-Corruption Act and come up with a new, more effective act, because this particular Anti-Corruption Act is not biting enough. It gives too much discretion to the judges, and that is why nobody has been jailed for embezzling funds, especially those who embezzle those $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 and more. None of them have gone to jail. Instead, they were just given a small fine and a tap in the back, in other words, as if they are being commended for stealing from the people of Sierra Leone. Now, secondly, Ernest Kroma and his cronies knew that there will come a time when a situation like this may come about, wherein there may be need for changes, not only to the act, but also to the commission. So they set it in a way wherein he and Eskroma can exercise, abuse his powers, just like he did with our constitution, and do the same thing with any anti-corruption czar after sending them a signal that if he can violate our constitution and nothing happened to him, then he can fire any anti-corruption commissioner without anybody asking him a question. But yet created that loophole so that if anybody else wants to do as he did or he wanted to do, then they will begin to ask them questions as to whether they are following the law. Which means, if you want to get rid of the corrupt anti-corruption commissioner, you can't have an agency set up to fight corruption when that particular agency becomes the epicenter for corruption itself. And you can't fight corruption when you have somebody heading the anti-corruption agency that was serving as the gatekeeper for those who were corrupting the system. For you to do that, you will have to not only set up a tribunal, and they will have to recommend the firing of the anti-corruption commissioner, and you need a 3/3 majority in parliament to get rid of him. Now imagine us trying to go through that process. It will take forever, and we'll never be able to get, because the man that was there will never persecute an Eskuruma, will never persecute the other guys. And one should not condone any form of violation of our laws, even if such a law is meant to do good. Like in this case, the violation is meant to do good, but it's still a violation. But considering the fact that they altered the very Anti-Corruption Act upon which the foundation of the commission is based, then one can technically argue that we don't even have an Anti-Corruption Act. So because of that violation that APC did, when they altered the very act that was passed from the House of Parliament from the one that was published, without sending it back to the House of Parliament for ratification, one can argue that Madabio did not even have to go through the process of firing Ade Macaulay, because technically speaking, we did not have an anti-corruption commissioner because of that illegal act. You see how corrupt people, the guy and the corrupt don't so sweet themselves, then go corrupt their own self. Then corrupt the very law they want to use for protect themselves. So the corrupt one, where they not corrupt the very law, the law will protect them so that they go get away with corruption. So technically speaking, we do not have an anti-corruption act because of that corrupt step that APC did by altering the very act that was passed in Parliament before they gazetted it. So that's my position. So we need to go back and get a new anti-corruption act, get it passed in the House of Parliament, and then reappoint the same anti-corruption commissioner. That's the way I think we can address this problem.
Next question.
Yes.
What role KKY should play in fighting corruption?
What role should KKY play in fighting corruption?
And how effective can he be, given his political capital?
Well, KKY.
Repeat the question.
He said, he's asking. He said, what role should Honorable Dr. Kande Kolek Yumkela play in fighting corruption, and how effective do I think he will be? That is the question that is being posed. Dr. Kande Kolek Yumkela has a moral obligation to fight corruption. He is now in a position as a member of parliament for him to join forces with the government in fighting corruption. But it cannot be done at the expense of the laws of our country, which must be respected. So his position is that, based on audio and video clips of stuff that I've read and listened to, is that he is ready to support the government to fight corruption. He is ready to toe the line with the government, but it must be done the right way. It must follow the laws. And you cannot say you want to enforce a law by initially breaching that law. But as I said earlier, the fact that APC unscrupulously altered the very Anti-Corruption Act before publishing it, after being passed in Parliament, after being ratified in Parliament, means that this very Anti-Corruption Act is probably legally not binding. So what I think Dr. Kane Koroko-Yomukela can do is to begin to discuss with the Speaker of Parliament about the need to come up with a new Anti-Corruption Act, even before they start any prosecution under this very act. This can be done within weeks. They can start off within this week or within next week. And people like us have already information and data, certain clauses, changes that we think needs to be done. We can supply them. So if Dr. Kane Yomukela wants to join the fight to fight the corruption, which I know he wants to, and he intends to do it, and because he's very concerned about making sure it's done right, is for him to start off by putting forward a bill or an amendment to the current Anti-Corruption Act, just so that it can be binding and enforceable. Or come up with a completely brand new one, which is what I'm recommending. Now, in terms of how effective it can be, depends on several factors. One, you have to remember that he has only less than five members of parliament out of 130 something. We have C4C that has 10. And the other opposition, the other party that has a large number of parliamentarians is APC. But APC is the target. Well, I can't say is the target. APC is the epicenter of corruption, at least for the past 10 years. So there is no way APC will support any anti-corruption act that will be used against them. So if you look at the number of parliamentarians under SLPP, the number of members of parliament that are paramount chiefs, and the 10 members from C4C, 9 or 10 members from C4C, and 4 or 5 members of NGC, plus the independent candidate, they have enough members to pass any bill without APC. And I know there are some within APC that mean well. Perhaps they were not part and parcel of the corrupt element, and they were just parliamentarians. And I'm sure some of those will be willing to join forces with SLPP, Dr. Kane Koroko-Yomukela, and other members of the opposition to pass a bill that will become binding. So the extent of his effectiveness will be based on how far he's able to create an alliance within the House of Parliament to do what is right for the people of Sierra Leone. And I know APC will not support that, because they enjoy the opium addiction of corruption. So APC will not support anything that has to do with fighting corruption in Sierra Leone, because they are the symbol of corruption in Sierra Leone.
So so we get, I believe we have some politicians who were in parliament before the election and after the election.
Or those that lost their seats?
No, those that won their seat. If they are found to be corrupt, what should happen, since they are currently in the government?
Oh, that's a catch-22 area. He's saying that there are some members of parliament who were in the House of Parliament within the past 10 years and who were re-elected. And as we know, corruption was very endemic within the previous two houses of parliament. There are situations wherein members of the executive branch will present a budget, like the Minister of Finance will project a budget, and you have several departments within ministries actually being requested to give something to the parliamentarians before they can pass the bill. So parliamentarians were part and parcel of the corruption. There were parliamentarians who were also so-called duty-free agents. They will have vehicles of girlfriends and business associates and give them waivers because they fell within the category of sacred cows under Ernest Bai Koroma. So there are quite a good number of them who are involved in corruption that are also part of the current parliament. So his question is, how will they be, their issue will be addressed? Well, it is left with the Anti-Corruption Commissioner and, you know, the level of willingness of the Speaker of Parliament to see that those members of Parliament are also held responsible for their crime of economic treason. I know there is a law that says a member of Parliament is exempted from being served to appear court when they are on their way to the House of Parliament. But there are instances when Parliament will have recess, instances when Parliament will have a break. So those times you can sue them and find them to come to appear court when Parliament is not in session. In other words, if you are indicted to go to court, they cannot appear in court when Parliament is in session. But if Parliament is not in session, those hours when Parliament is not in session, they can even set up weekend tribunal. They can set up cases at weekends, during weekends. They can do it at night too. Bring light so that those parliamentarians will have to answer to their crimes. So that's the way I think we should handle it. They should be prosecuted too. Once you set an example, you set a high standard, believe me, it will help to curb corruption in the long run. Again, over the past 10 years, when you take our GDP between 2007 to 2017, an average of $4 billion a year, and you consider the fact that our tax ratio is between 15 to 20%, both income, GST, as well as corporate tax, if you take 15% as an average, that is over $600 million every year that the government generates from our GDP in the form of taxation, or ought to have generated in the form of taxation. When you consider the $100 to $200 million every year that we get as grant, aid, and budgetary subsidy, plus the $2.6 billion or $3.7 billion that these guys took as loan on behalf of the people of Sierra Leone, they were playing with an average of $10 to $11 billion within the past 10 years. Now, Ernest Koroma and his 40 thieves needs to tell us what they did with $11 billion within the past 10 years. They said they built roads. We need to value the roads and see how much of that money went to it. The agencies that they created, the monies that they embezzled, the tens of thousands of dollars that they paid to government, to employees of government, paid in dollars. Anti-Corruption Commissioner, paid in dollars, man. I think it was something like $5,000 to $10,000 a month. People are dying. They don't have medication to take care of their kids. And these guys had the audacity to pay people that amount of money a month. And the banking sector, they need to do acid test. In fact, I would recommend Madabio need to sell off government shares in the Sierra Leone Commercial Bank. But those shares should be strictly sold to Sierra Leoneans. And there is a way we can do it. That even if it requires us coming up with $200, $300 million, there is a way Sierra Leoneans can come up with $200 to $300. Some of us are working on that modalities under the formation of an investment vehicle called the Sierra Investment Fund. There are Sierra Leoneans that can come together. You have 100,000 Sierra Leoneans each investing $1,000 within 5 years can raise that amount of money to pay off and buy Sierra Leone Commercial Bank from the government, so that we stop politicians using the Sierra Leone Commercial Bank as a cash cow. We need to investigate the leadership of the commercial bank itself, because they put the government, the economic state of the nation in jeopardy by using the commercial bank and the shares that the government has in the bank as a cash cow for politicians. You saw people coming and taking billions of loans. They have no business to run. They have no business to say, I'm running a business to pay back. And yet commercial banks have no economic value that they show that they are engaged in any economic activity, except that because they are ministers, they know that, oh, they have somewhere to steal money. Maybe that's the economic activity upon which commercial bank was giving them money for them to siphon out of the system. So they should be investigated. They should do an acid test on the commercial bank, and government should begin to work on modalities of selling the government-owned shares in commercial bank, but strictly to Sierra Leoneans. That is the way we can get Sierra Leoneans to buy those shares. If they need $200, $200, $300 million, we can raise it and buy those shares from Sierra Leone Commercial, from the government of Sierra Leone. So it become purely private-owned bank, so that we have the right type of people, not political appointees, are placed in those positions that are going to be distributing the funds of the bank.
Very good. Do you want to talk about the declaration of assets? It might have you already.
Oh yes,
how effective is that?
Well, they're asking about the declaration of assets. It's a very good starting point for the president and the vice president to start the ball rolling of declaring their assets. It's commendable. It's a move. It's a sign to show that this guy, somehow, it looks like he means business, and we should give him the benefit of the doubt. But those declarations should be made public. We need to see what is in it so we can compare and contrast 5 years from now. That's the only step that is left now. But we'll give you some time. Maybe you need to adjust after a certain period. Maybe after a year, you need to readjust your assets. But for now, it's a good step, but we still need to see it. You need to have it published.
So you think, like, for making the declaration of assets more effective, close family members also for kind of declaring your assets? Is that constitutional?
Well, he's asking whether we should require close family members like spouse and kids, brothers and uncles to declare their assets too. I don't think so. I don't think that's taking it too far. But we all know that if somebody declares their assets, we know what he has and what he doesn't have. And his brother and sister, they're not engaged in any multi-million-dollar business that we say they're bringing money in. And all of a sudden, we'll see them in a multi-million-dollar house. It's easy to create a connection. But in any case, I really think, one thing we have to remember, after Samuel Timagai, there is no more political leader in the history of Sierra Leone that has maintained such a good, high standard of integrity for us to revere like Samuel Timagai. So this is an opportunity Ernest Nkrumah had, but he squandered it. Madabio, you have the opportunity of becoming another Samuel Timagai. You see how people are happy to see a statue of Samuel Timagai, how we are happy to make reference to his name because of the good record he left. So you could be another Samuel Timagai if you continue on this level, if you continue to define a high standard and do what is right for the people of Sierra Leone. So let's hope You are smart enough to know that this is an opportunity to set up a historical, momentous steps that will leave your name in the positive light in the history, in the stand of history of Sierra Leone. So please don't waver. Thank you. I guess we've exhausted now. We need to round up. We'll have another show that focuses mainly on how to fight corruption in Sierra Leone. This is just a general overview of how the corruption was taking place. Those 10-15% commission for issuing contracts. And contracts were issued only to foreigners. Most of the contracts that Ernest Kroma and his cronies were issuing out, they are issued to only two categories of people. Foreigners, mostly, or people that are connected with the APC party. And even those that are connected with APC party, they get the contract, they send it to foreigners to execute the contract. And they cash out millions of dollars out of it. This is how unpatriotic these guys were.
So regarding your opinion, what advice do you have for Madabio?
Well, what advice do I have for Madabio? I've just made comment reference to a few earlier. But most importantly, I want him to make sure that he does not look back in this step that is beginning to take in defining a high standard for himself and his team. I like the idea that he came up with a chief minister that is not politically connected with most people in the country.
What is the function of the chief minister?
Even though some people might argue that it may not be constitutional, you can't create such a high-ranking position without being legislated, without having the legislature do it. But they were smart enough to say they are replacing the chief of staff position. So the chief minister is more or less in the position of the chief of staff. But realistically speaking, a chief minister has more power than a chief of staff. The chief minister is like has power over the entire administration of government. You know, the chief minister is more the administrative czar of the entire government, whereas a chief of staff only handles administrative affairs that relates to the president. But a chief minister handles administrative affairs, in other words, the boss of every branch of government. So that's a small distinction there. But for now, let's call them a replacement of the chief of staff. But if there is a way, I will want them to find a way to pass a bill creating legislating that position so that every subsequent government will consider that idea. It's a brilliant idea, but I would like them to legislate it. You know?
So another thing that was being said around for the chief minister, that was an attempt to marginalize the vice president?
They said it was an attempt to marginalize the vice president. No, I don't think so. It's not the vice president. You know, realistically speaking, a vice president is a symbolic position. It's only there to serve in lieu of the president when the president is not around. It's not there to take over the government and administer the government when the president is around. No, when the president is around, it's the president. The vice president only steps in when the president is not around. But in terms of the administrative affairs of the entire government, it's the chief minister that is responsible. So it's not any attempt to usurp the powers of the vice president, because they are not the same. The powers of the vice president is not the same as the powers of the chief ministers.
So you can wrap up now.
Yeah. So, fellow Sierra Leoneans, I'm sorry I had to deliver this in English because this is not election time, and I know our people most of our people understand English even if they cannot speak it. And I also wanted to reach out audience outside the Sierra Leonean circle, and most importantly, because of the poor internet connection in Sierra Leone, most of you will not be able to listen to it anyway. So I wanted to make room for non-Sierra Leoneans and other people that have interest in Sierra Leone, NGOs, foreign agencies, foreign government, to also be able to understand the subject of our discussion so they know exactly what is it that we are talking about. So we will find time to have another show. This time we'll give you guys like 3 or 4 days notice, wherein we will narrow the discussion to how do we fight corruption in Sierra Leone. And we will take questions even before the show. Few days before the show, we'll encourage people to post in, send their questions. And there's some technical problem with Facebook because they're working on readjusting their platform. So that area wherein you could type in question live is not available today, but perhaps by the next show that is going to be available. And we're also talking about how we can find a way to zoom this live on a website. I think it's been shown live on YouTube right now, but by next show we're going to make sure we share the links for the YouTube as well as for the Facebook, so that people will be able to view and participate in the discussion live. We're going to also have somebody who will be responsible of keeping tabs of the questions that you guys will be asking. Without much ado, this is Jesmed F Suma, Executive Director, JPAC. Thank you.